May we begin?
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. I know it's been a long week for all of you guys, and I know you're tired of coming here every day, but I want to take a minute and talk about why the state has the burden of proof that they have, the highest burden of proof that our law allows, which is beyond a reasonable doubt. A lot of people think that having that high of a burden is there because it's supposed to protect the defendants in criminal cases. But in fact, I think it protects the jurors just the same, if not more, than it does the defendant, because making the state prove every element of their case beyond a reasonable doubt is what is going to keep each of you from waking up in the middle of the night.
Your Honor.
The decisions that you make today will not just affect Carly Gregg, it will affect her entire family. And it's a heavy burden to carry. So, I want to take a few minutes and talk about the truth. The truth is rarely pure and never simple. That's what Oscar Wilde said. Let's talk about what is undisputed in this case. It is undisputed that Carly loved her mom. You never heard the testimony of one person in this case who said otherwise. It's undisputed that Carly had no history of violence prior to March 19th. Nothing you heard. There is no evidence that tells you otherwise. It's undisputed that Carly Gregg loved her stepdad. In fact, he was the only dad she really ever had. No one told you otherwise. It's undisputed that Carly Gregg believed her father had a mental illness, bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. Carly was afraid of her dad. She knew he was an unsuccessful man. She knew he was abusive. She didn't like being around him. She didn't want to be like him. It's also undisputed that that's something Carly worried about all the time, because that's something her mom worried about all the time. Her mom frequently worried that Carly was going to end up with the same mental illnesses that her dad had, because they're hereditary. It is undisputed that Carly had been experiencing serious mental health issues for quite some time prior to the events of March 19th. She had bulimia for 2 years. She had intrusive thoughts. She had racing thoughts. She had engaged in self-harm behaviors. Carly had anxiety. She had been diagnosed with a major depressive disorder, and she had developed trouble sleeping for months prior to March 19th. Moreover, we have her journal entry from April 7th of 2023 in which she writes down, "Do I have schizophrenia?" We have Carly's other journal entries prior to March 19th, including her journal entry on March 12th, which you'll have back there in there with you, and I implore you to read, in which Carly writes down and says, "Am I having a psychotic break?" Talking about the voices in her head. We heard the testimony of SK, and that testimony came out on cross-examination, not with me on direct, but with the prosecutor on cross, that yes, Carly did in fact tell somebody prior to March 19th that she'd been hearing voices in her head. And who did she tell? The person she was most likely to tell, her very best friend, who told us that they told each other everything. Now, it is also undisputed that Carly's mental health issues worsened by December of 2023 to the point that her parents sought medical intervention and put her in counseling and got her on an antidepressant. And I want to take a minute and break that decision down, because we've spent a lot of time in this case talking about Carly and her mom and how much they loved each other. But I want to break down the decision a mom is making to put her child on an antidepressant at that point. What did we know about Ashley Smylie? That she was an incredibly loving mother. Her world revolved around Carly. What Michael just told you was true. Carly was the love of her mother's life. We also know that Carly's mom was overprotective, and understandably so, because she had lost a child. Carly was the only child she had left. Do you honestly believe that loving, overprotective mother would make a decision to put her child on an antidepressant medication when she herself had had horrible side effects when placed on Prozac? She had become suicidal. Do you think that mother would have taken any risk with her child, the only child she had left, knowing how serious those risks were, when she decided to put her 14-year-old on an antidepressant medication? No, of course she wouldn't. That tells you everything you need to know about the serious issues Carly was having, whether her parents wanted to admit it, whether Carly wanted to admit it or not. You can't tell me Ashley Smylie, as loving and protective as she was, would have taken that risk with Carly if it wasn't required. Now, knowing all this, it's also undisputed by Rebecca Kirk, the only medical professional who spent more than a day with Carly that you heard from in this case, who had treated Carly from January of 2024 to March of 2024, a 3-month period of time, that Carly was a sweet, gifted child with no history of violence. Ms. Kirk also called the taking the knife to school incident much ado about nothing. She told us that it was evident that Carly loved her mom, wanted to please her mom, and was worried about stressing her mom out, to the point that Carly walked on eggshells, trying not to upset her mom. She told us a story about how at one point Carly saw her mom having to grade a bunch of tests, being stressed out, and Carly wanted to help. So she asked her mom if she could help her grade the test. And when Ashley snapped back, which is something parents sometimes do when they're stressed out and a child catches you at the wrong moment, that hurt Carly's feelings so much, that was the only thing that Rebecca Kirk could pull out of her when she was trying to get Carly to open up about traumatic experiences she had had. Just having a mom snap at you was traumatic to Carly. How could Carly tell her mom she was experiencing the same mental health issues that her dad had? How could any 14-year-old? It's also undisputed from Ms. Kirk herself that she knew there was more going on with Carly than Carly was disclosing. And she worked very hard at that last session trying to pull it out of Carly, to the point that she thought, maybe I should refer them to somebody else, because there's more here than I can get to. We've heard the testimony of Carly's stepfather, who has no reason to defend this child. It's not his biological child. He was very much in love with his wife. They were still in the honeymoon phase. You heard him on that 911 call. That was a man in shock, in grief, and in pain. You heard his testimony about feeling intimidated regarding his testimony in this case. But despite all of that, he has continued to tell the truth consistently from March 19th until his testimony in this courtroom today, and he continues to stand by Carly to this day and support her. And he said, I've noticed that Carly was experiencing memory lapses in the fall of 2023. It was bizarre. I noticed that Carly was losing track of time. It was bizarre. They knew Carly wasn't able to sleep. They were worried about how much melatonin she was taking to try to sleep at night. We heard from Dr. Pickett how that all correlates with bipolar disorder. It is undisputed from the testimony of the minors who testified in this courtroom today this week that Carly had only started smoking marijuana in February. It is also undisputed by the testimony in this case and the records we put in evidence from Vital Corps, which you'll have back there with you, and I hope you'll look at, that it was only after Carly was finally put on Abilify, an antipsychotic medication, that the voices stopped and her mental health issues decreased. The crying spells, the depression, the low lows. Only after the antipsychotic medication. And why? Well, we heard from the medical professionals why. In the words of Dr. Clark, when you have a child experiencing psychotic issues, you have to stabilize their mood before an antidepressant can be effective. And if you don't stabilize their mood, then the antidepressant can do more harm than good. And that's exactly what happened to Carly Gregg on March 19th. We heard the video from the garage cam of Heath Smylie coming home on March 19th. We heard those feral screams that Carly made the whole time. And we heard the testimony of Mr. Smylie that he was so convinced by the state of terror Carly was in that after she left that house and he was wounded and bleeding, he walked around the house with the handgun looking for the intruder that he believed was there based on the state of terror Carly was in. We heard the screams. You can't fake that. You can't make that terror up. Carly has consistently reported to everyone that the last thing she remembered on March 19th was taking the dogs out, and the next thing she remembered was crawling through a sewer filled with water. And I personally believe that it was the cold water that brought Carly back out of it and back to herself, the shock of it. The state would have you believe that Carly intended to kill her mom on March 19th when Carly didn't even know during the evaluations that her friends had sought to intervene because they believed that what they saw from Carly was due to marijuana use that started in February rather than symptoms of a mental illness that they could not know about. But that story just doesn't track. Because for the genius kid that Carly has been repeatedly described as, don't you think she would have known if she intended to do what she did on March 19th, where the camera was in the kitchen, and that she ought to take it down before it films her doing everything she did? Because I didn't make a 30 on my ACT, but I would have known to do that. That doesn't sound like the actions of a smart kid who was intending to do anything. If Carly intended to kill her mom because her mom found out she was smoking pot, then why wouldn't she have left the house after she killed her mom? Why not run then? Why call all of her good friends asking for help, terrified, crying, saying she couldn't tell them what happened? Why text her stepdad anything? Why wait in the house? And what did her stepdad have to do with anything? He didn't know about the marijuana usage. He didn't have any skin in that game. It doesn't make sense, and the state can't tell you why she did any of those things. But they have to prove it to you beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, no one, not her stepdad, not her counselors, not Dr. Clark, who was teaching psychiatry at Harvard while Dr. Pickett was still in medical school, believed that Carly was a sociopath or a psychopath. Even Dr. Pickett said that was going too far. The state put on the testimony of BW, who is the only person who told us anything about Carly making a statement about shooting her mom, and she had 3 more for her stepdad. I didn't hear that statement from the law enforcement officers that interviewed her. I heard it from the prosecutor. But I also heard from the prosecutor that BW was a little bit of an unreliable witness because she answered the first question of, where did Carly get marijuana from? I don't know. To have to answer immediately with the follow-up question, well, isn't it true that you bought it and gave it to her? Yeah, that's true. So that tells us right there we've got a little bit of an unreliable witness. Now, we also had Dr. Pickett, who gave us his opinion. But Dr. Pickett admitted that he had no experience whatsoever in the field of child and adolescent psychiatry. He had never evaluated a child before Carly. He had never testified in a criminal case before, and he had never qualified as an expert before in anything, in any criminal case before this one. So I have a hard time accepting Dr. Pickett's opinion that, especially when he is discounting the diagnosis of a doctor who diagnosed Carly's father with bipolar disorder, and the reason that Dr. Pickett told us that he discounted this other doctor's diagnosis was because that doctor had only seen Kevin Gregg 3 times. Well, Dr. Pickett saw him 0 times, but yet he's able to undiagnose him and re-diagnose him? I mean, if Dr. Pickett can diagnose or undiagnose someone without ever seeing them, he's going to have a hell of a career. And even though Dr. Pickett denied having a preconceived bias going into this case, I couldn't help but realize he had memorized all the medication that Kevin Gregg was on that he believed contributed to Kevin Gregg just being a drug addict. But he somehow missed the 3 antipsychotic medications that Kevin Gregg had been on. That Mr. Gregg had been prescribed for his bipolar disorder and possibly schizophrenia. But you know what? Those facts didn't fit his story, so no need to include them. And I actually couldn't stop thinking about that. Why was it that he memorized the medications he believed were easy for people to abuse and become addicted to, but just couldn't remember it all? The 3 antipsychotic medications that Mr. Gregg was on at the same time. That stood out to me, who's not a doctor and who doesn't have training in this field. I had to go Google those drugs to learn they were antipsychotics. And then I realized when I was looking at Dr. Pickett's CV, which we also put into evidence, and I hope you look at, that he served as a Hinds County Sheriff's Deputy for 3 years prior to going to medical school, and it made sense. Then his diagnosis made sense to me, because when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
2 minutes, ma'am.
Thank you. I hope that seeing all the people who knew and loved Carly the best prior to March 19th, her friends, her maternal grandparents, her stepfather, her counselor, I hope seeing that they still love and support Carly Gregg after March 19th tells you everything you need to know about the incident that occurred on March 19th, that wasn't Carly. Because if it was, why would the parents of those friends still let their daughter call Carly? Why would they be here testifying for her? And let's talk about this genius kid. The easiest story she could have told would have been, I shot my mom and stepdad because my stepdad had been molesting me for years. My mom knew about it and said nothing. And people would have bought it all day long. That's a convenient lie. And it would have served her all day long at the expense of her mom and her stepdad. That's the easier story to tell. But that's not what Carly said. Carly told the hard truth about her mental health issues. A truth that these are rare and it's happening, but that this happens often when you put kids on the wrong medication, when they already have these underlying significant mental health disorders and they get treated with the wrong medication. This is what can happen. I hope none of us are ever judged by the worst moments of our life, but rather by our lives as a whole. And I think when you step back and you look at the facts of this case as a whole.
Any further time will be deducted on the
Okay.
back.
And when you look at the facts of this case as a whole and the picture of who Carly Gregg is as a person on a whole, you will see that this was not a bad kid. This was not a kid who was enraged. This was not a kid who had hatred in her heart for her mother or her stepfather. In fact, the exact opposite. This was a kid who was experiencing significant mental health issues, the same mental health issues that ran in her family and that we know are hereditary. This is the kid who was compliant with the medication she was put on. However, that medication, without anyone being able to tell beforehand, caused her symptoms to worsen. And while she was having a state of psychosis and an episode of acute stress on March 19th, she lost herself in what was the perfect storm. I am asking you, for those reasons, to please find Carly Gregg not guilty by reason of insanity and finally quell this storm for Carly and her family. No one will understand this case, and no one has heard this case the way that you have. And passing judgment on another person is a heavy burden to bear, and I'm sorry that it falls on you. But please consider what is at stake in this case for this child and this family before you rush to judgment and render your verdict. Look at those documents. Consider the testimony. Search your heart for what you know about this child from the picture painted by her of all the people that knew her best. And you tell me, what was the intent? You tell me why someone who intended and had planned to murder someone wouldn't have taken the camera she knew was in the kitchen and was easy to see down before she did anything, especially when she was a genius. I mean, that's not the actions of a diabolical evil genius, leaving camera footage up for everyone to see, crawling through a sewer instead of just running away, calling friends for help, friends who could later testify about what happened. Again, I ask you to search your hearts and remember the undisputed truths in this case. Thank you.
Mr. Camp, 17 minutes.
Thank you, Your Honor.
We'll start the clock until you have everything set up and you're ready then.
May it please the court?
Yes.
Okay, we've been doing this since Monday, so I know y'all are probably as tired as I am. This was always going to be a very difficult case, and it's going to be difficult because the issues that we're dealing with is difficult because we're in part of a realm of the law and everything where you've been hearing a case all week and the defendant has basically said she's guilty, and so there's not an issue of guilt in this case. As we said from the get-go, this is not a who did it case. This is why it happened. Okay, what's going on? That's what you have to make the determinations, is what's going on in Carly's mind as all this stuff is happening. And that's the difficult part, because you don't get to just look at the video and say, she did it, because most cases that's what you're doing. And it's an easy decision, because you're looking at it and you simply see who did what, how they did it, and that's it. Now, In this case, because we're dealing with her mental state, we're having to get inside her mind and understand what's going on and how that's all working. And that's what this case has always been about from the get-go. It's never been about who did it. One of the things that I wanted to talk with you just a little bit about is you had, in this case, you had one psychologist, two psychiatrists. And both of the psychiatrists were forensic psychiatrists, and the psychologist was a forensic psychologist. And you had the two psychiatrists gave very different opinions. And some of the things that I wanted to point out on that is you have one of the doctors, which is Dr. Pickett. It was his first time ever being qualified as an expert. First time testifying. He just got certified a year ago. And then you have an opinion of somebody who has even a higher degree, and that's Dr. Clark. And Dr. Clark is board certified in pediatric and adolescent psychiatry, which means he deals with kids. He deals with teenagers. He knows the nuances of how that works. If you listen to Dr. Pickett, and Dr. Pickett was 100% correct on this, he can do evaluations on everybody. But the problem is, he doesn't know the nuances of the kids and the adolescents. And we're dealing with an adolescent. Carly was 14 when this happened. She turned 15 in jail. As all of y'all know, things are changing in people's bodies at those ages. They're growing, they're becoming adults. You have a lot of different things going on. All those things have to be taken into consideration when you're coming up with the decisions, or when you're coming up with how to do an evaluation on a person. And that's why you need that specialized knowledge, is to know what's going on in teenagers. Dr. Clark gave you a very precise reason of how all this happened, why it happened. And he said it was a difficult case to look at. Dr. Pickett, he basically wanted to just pick Dr. Clark's case or diagnosis part and say, couldn't happen. And one of the big issues with that was the diagnosis of Carly's father. And why that's important is one of the prongs, and I know you've heard psychiatric stuff all week and it sort of gets old, but one of the prongs in order to see if somebody, I guess, is bipolar, one of the big issues is, has that person, or does that person have a family history? And that's why that became a big issue. And you heard Dr. Pickett get up there, and he looked at Dr. Hardy's stuff and said, well, I'm going to change the diagnosis. So he said, I'm going to discount that, which takes one of the prongs away with one of the things you're looking at with Carly. The other stuff that he wanted to discount, and I thought this was interesting, is you just heard, you're reminded about SK when she got up on the stand. And she said, yeah, Carly had been hearing voices. I knew about it. Carly said that. Dr. Pickett, you heard him on the stand. It's like, if you bring me credible evidence, you bring me something, and I'll change my mind. Well, you had the friend say, oh yeah, I mean, we talked about it. Comes out on cross-examination, not direct, which was interesting. But it comes out, and then Dr. Pickett sits there and says, well, it's a friend, so I'm not going to count that. Okay, there's a journal. Okay, in the journal, Carly makes some notes about that she's heard voices and stuff. I'm going to discount that because I think that's her embellishing. All this stuff is, all the SJ's testimony, the journal, all that stuff's happened before this situation took place on the 19th of March. And it's important because what you're seeing, and it's what Dr. Clark said, there's probably an undiagnosed, or there was an undiagnosed situation going on. It happens for a lot of different reasons. You have an individual, Carly, who's not telling everything. We know that. We know a lot more now than we did before. You heard from Miss Kirk, and I thought Miss Kirk was one of the things that was very enlightening with what Miss Kirk said. She was having a difficult time getting anything out of Carly. She really wasn't opening up. And so finally, the last session, which happens to be right before this happens, she was able to open up a little bit with her and get some more information. And in Carly's journal, there's an entry in there that talks about she likes Miss Kirk and that she may bring her the journal and let her see some of the stuff. That was something that was interesting. The other part that Miss Kirk said, she had no idea. Nobody had any ideas that this was going to happen, that there was a chance that this could happen. There were no clues, there was nothing. This is one thing I do agree 100% with Dr. Pickett on, and he said this was an unusual case. And the reason why it's such an unusual case, daughters don't go and shoot their mothers for no reason. Dr. Clark talked to you a little bit about it. It's like, well, usually you either have panic, and we saw it from the video and everything. There's no panic. He also talked to you about that there was mental issues that were going on. They had started in January. She was getting treatment. We didn't know how bad they were, but she had started getting treatment. They were getting worse, as we can tell from different things now, where we're looking in the journals and things of that nature. The other thing that's very interesting is that on the back end, once she was incarcerated and she was getting treatment, the correct treatment, she got better. And that's when she got the Celexa and the Abilify. And those medications were working. And it's sort of what you were just told a second ago. You have to have a stabilizer. And that's what she needed, was the stabilizer. It stopped the voices. It stopped what was going on. We go back to the 19th of March, and you see what occurred. There's no reason why Carly should have gone and shot her mother. There's no reason. What's equally weird about this whole situation, and it was in the state's opening, they talked a little bit about it. She crossed her arms. Again, very bizarre activity. She's singing to the dogs. And the most bizarre thing that occurs is this. She wants to go after Heath. Why? There is no reason. She calls her friends over. Friends are fine. If she's some sort of psychopath wanting to go shoot 500 people kind of person, if she's calling people over, those would be some of the people that she would I guess, target. But no, what happens is she's reaching out for help. She's in a mental health crisis. You heard the video that, or the audio, I guess, of Heath. When Heath was, when he arrived home, opens the door and gets shot at. Heath took the stand. He tells you to this day, that wasn't Carly. The person that was shooting at him was not Carly. It's real important. He's the last person that's seeing her right there as it's happening. This is the person who knows. This is the person that sees her every day, that knows Carly. And yet, he's saying, she's shooting at him. If there's anybody that has a reason to, disavow Carly and say, hey, look, she shot me. I don't want to have anything to do. She killed my wife. He's sitting there saying, and he was doing it to his own detriment, and he's saying, that's not her. Something's wrong. That was not her. And that's what he was trying to convey to you. Now, the next thing we have, can I play the video real quick? Will you help me with that? We have the video from Hinds County Sheriff Officer, or Deputy Shack. And we played it. And if you remember, the last thing that he says before, I guess it would help if you have the last thing, and we put it to, move it up a little bit. The last thing that he says before he mutes his body cam, listen to what it is. He says something to the effect that she doesn't know about her mother. And before we go back and listen, remember what Shaq said, why he was muting it. He said it was a personnel issue. If she doesn't know about her mother, that she is shot, and all this stuff that's gone on, she doesn't know what's going on. That's why that's important. And I want you to listen to it. You're going to be able to take this back and see and hear this video again. There's a policy, and I put the policy in evidence, just so everybody's clear. They cannot do what Shaq did. They cannot mute it. They don't have, yeah, you can go ahead. We're going to watch it. How much? Okay, go ahead and stop it.
Let me back up and go around.
I'm running out of time, so y'all will have to look at it. But this is, when you go back in the jury room, you have some decisions to make. And these are the decisions that you have to address. You can find her guilty. You can find her not guilty. And if you find her not guilty, you have two different options. It says not guilty by reason of insanity, and then you have to see if she has been restored to reason. If she has, then she's finished at this court. The other option, and this is what you have to look at, is you can find her not guilty by reason of insanity, and that she has not been restored, and that she's a danger to the community. And what that means is she goes to the state hospital, or somebody comes, so she gets evaluated, and they make the decisions on what happens to her. So when I'm telling you this is not, she has the keys and she's walking home. That's not what happens. We believe from all the testimony, and you can look on it here, you have the father saying it's not her, and then you have Shaq saying she doesn't know what happened. When you see those, that tells you she doesn't know what was going on at that time. We're asking you to find her not guilty by reason of insanity. And then you have to make the decision, was she restored or was she not? If she's not, she gets evaluated by the state hospital. They determine what's going to happen to her. That's what we're asking for. We want you to find her not guilty by reason of insanity.
State has 18 and a half minutes. We won't start the clock until you get everything set up.
Can you just look around a couple of minutes, if you don't mind?
Yes, ma'am.
I have some of your exhibits, Your Honor.
If you would just return them up here to the exhibit table, please, sir.